Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with a little history that some of you may or may not know about the Claudio Abbado Mahler Adagio scandal / lawsuit against Polygram, as it was then known. It was Polygram. This is very, very interesting. Back in the day, and this is in the 1990s, around 1996, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Polygram did a recording called Carillon Adagio, which consisted, as you might expect, of Carillon playing lots of slow movements, adagios, basically. And it sold very, very well. It sold millions of copies. It was really quite successful. And they were in the process of making a second one. And they decided that they wanted to mix it up a little bit over there at Deutsche Grammophon, and maybe, God forbid, make some money. So they jiggered up a release called Abbado Mahler Adagio. It was Mahler Adagio, at least with Claudio Abbado, with adagios from like the 4th, 5th, 6th symphonies, 3 or 4 of them, all on a disc. And they released that. And you can still find it on Amazon.com. If you enter, Mahler Adagio Abbado, you'll find the cover for the thing. Well, Claudio Abbado evidently was not aware that this was happening, or they didn't tell him, or they didn't get his approval, or whatever it was. He sued Polygram to stop sales of Mahler Adagio, which they'd already spent a considerable amount of money in marketing on. And they actually settled they always settle out of court. It's so boring. I wish they would have a jury trial and hang the loser. But anyway, it doesn't happen that way. And they withdrew the recording. The bottom line was he won. His argument for why he didn't want it was that it encroached on his artistic integrity by taking these individual movements out of context. And a critical opinion back in the day was divided. Some people, like my colleague and good friend Rob Cowan, for example, was writing for The Independent then. He was on Abbado's side. He thought that it would be better if they just kept his Mahler symphonies in print and people had to buy the whole symphony. I am totally at the opposite end of that argument, completely. My feeling is that any kind of classical music is great no matter how anybody gets it, or why they get it, or what it looks like, or how it has to be packaged. And when a record label invests millions of dollars in an artist, and promoting an artist, and building their career, and making record after record after record after record, then they have a right to sell the product. And selling a bunch of isolated Mahler adagios, I would rather die than listen to that. Don't get me wrong. I wouldn't touch it with a pair of tongs. I wouldn't buy it if it were the last record on the planet. But others have a right to do so. And if there's a market for it, if the label can sell the damn thing, God forbid they should sell people what they're asking for in a format that they ask for. There's this sense that drives me crazy that the classical music industry is not supposed to give classical music listeners what they want, or what they have to be told what to want and how to want it. And if they don't like it the way it's being offered, then there's something wrong with them. Well, that's not how the universe works in terms of commerce. In commerce, you look at the marketplace and you see that there's a demand for something, and then you meet the demand. So if there's a demand for Mahler adagios, then for God's sake, give them Mahler adagios. Who does it hurt? Doesn't hurt Mahler. Doesn't hurt the adagio. Doesn't hurt the listeners. They're getting a chance to encounter music that they wouldn't otherwise be listening to in the format that most appeals to them. And I totally understand people who say you've got to listen to the whole symphony. It's terrible to take things out of context. I agree with all that personally. From an aesthetic and artistic point of view. But I'll be damned if I'm going to tell consumers how they have to consume classical music when they have all these options available and all these different ways to do it. I'm not in a position to say what may encourage them to get more interested in classical music. The actual reality with most of these crossover productions or compilations is that they only make markets for more compilations. That's why Karajan Adagio was successful. They wanted to do the Mahler Adagio with Abbado. That was the whole point, that they could sell compilations of that sort as a niche, as a separate item. And those people are probably not going to run around looking for complete Mahler symphonies. I mean, if they do, fabulous. They should be able to, and they should have the product available. But chances are they're just going to want another Adagio collection, or maybe only one in their entire lives. That's really closer to the reality of the situation. But be that as it may, Abbado irritated the hell out of me because he had this extremely elitist and snooty defense about his artistic integrity and all that stuff. It's like bullshit. I mean, my feeling about Abbado's artistic integrity was all we needed to know about it was that he made that glorious Deutsche Grammophon premiere of Rossini's Il Viaggio a Rams, and then he jumped ship and made the same thing a few years later for Sony Classical with half of the same cast for no reason whatsoever, other than the fact that he could. It was the cocaine hippo of Rossini opera recording, something they just did because they could, not because anyone needed it, or his performance was different, or his interpretation was different, or the singers were different enough to make any difference. It was a farce. And he screwed Deutsche Grammophon, which had such a huge investment in him. And he started remaking this stuff for Sony that he'd done for DG. He didn't care. He doesn't care. He never give a damn about marketing. He never give a damn about his labels. He never betrayed a hint of loyalty to the people who stood by him all those years. I mean, it's unbelievable what an ingrate the man was and what an opinion he had of himself. Oh my God, such an ego. He was supposed to be terribly humble and wonderful before the music, a humble servant of the score and all that crap. Well, we know where that went. I mean, seriously. So it was an embarrassment, for him to be that. He was so hypocritical about it. But I'll tell you how I would have resolved the Abbado Mahler Adagio problem. I would have summoned him to my office or gone to meet him at his chalet or wherever he was hanging out with his cronies. And I would have said, Maestro Abbado, I understand you have an issue with our Mahler Adagio. So I'll tell you what, not only will we withdraw the Mahler Adagio recording, but we will destroy every master of every Mahler recording that appeared on the Mahler Adagio recording. And I would have my master tape sitting there on my desk, and I would take it with a paperweight and go crunch. So that one is gone. Let's do the next one. Crunch. That one is gone. And I would say to him, however, I'm just kidding. We have copies, but we will destroy the masters of all of your recordings for Deutsche Grammophon. It's not a problem unless you give us however much we invested in making the recording in the first place. You think your recordings are so important. You're worried about your artistic integrity. Pay for it. Give us $275,000 per master, and you can have them all. And if you don't want to do that, then either we can release Mahler Adagio and you'll sell it and you'll get your royalties, you'll be fine. Or we will simply destroy them all. And you can go find another label that wants to, you can snooker for millions and millions of dollars in production costs of records, only a minority of which ever sold any respectable quantities. I mean, that's what I would do. It's really what I would do. I would absolutely, and he'd have to make up his mind. He can either fork up the money and preserve his legacy and artistic integrity, because who cares? Who cares about anything the man recorded? He didn't do anything someone else didn't do just as well. And if he did something stunningly, like his Alexander Nevsky or some of that stuff, well, somehow we would survive, because there will be other people who will do Alexander Nevsky stunningly, or some Mahler symphonies stunningly. Nobody needs him. Nobody needs his recordings. And I would really let him know that. But of course, they couldn't do that. First of all, they're all in Europe. And in Europe, it's like, hail to the artist and all that garbage. That's number one. Number two, it would have caused a terrible, terrible scandal in the artistic community. Everybody would have immediately backed up Abbado at the expense of, to the detriment of Deutsche Grammophon, which I just think is terrible because, nobody is more critical of the major labels than I am. But I am not critical of whatever efforts they make to sell classical music. I may not like what they do. I may think what they put out is junk. I may dislike all of those things are out there. But I support 100% their right to make money off of their investment and their investment in the artist. And so I thought Abbado's lawsuit against Universal was disgraceful. And I would have obliterated his memory from the roster of Deutsche Grammophon artists. I would have. I just don't think he matters. He doesn't matter. Not that much. Not enough to tell me, his label, that we do not have the right to try and earn a profit off of his work. If he doesn't want to earn a profit off of his work, let him go work somewhere else. But it's stunning to me. Stunning that kind of behavior was tolerated, and eventually it wasn't just tolerated; it was validated by the end result. I mean, the Deutsche Grammophon enabled him at the end of the day, and he was still making recordings for Sony, and then eventually he was doing things with the Lucerne Festival at DG. Okay, fine, but I just was horrified by that, and that was my feeling about it. And I wanted to share the story with you because it really is. It's an interesting little anecdote in the wonderful world of classical music sales. And it just goes to show, I think the point is, the moral of the story, it just goes to show how difficult it is to actually sell classical music when the artists, the people who are producing the product, are so completely, totally clueless and just devoid of basic commercial instincts. Some were not. Stokowski, some of them, some conductors cared about selling records, and they cared about what their record labels did. There were always a few who knew what was really going on, who had no objection to people making an effort to sell the product. But Abbado was not one of them, and I just don't think that should have been tolerated. So there you have it, my friends. Keep on listening and take care.